Okay, that looks like it's started. Great. Okay, over to you, Alberto.
All right. Yes. So thank you for coming to this morning for the Getting Started on Your Dissertation workshop. I'm going to give a little bit of an overview of what the workshop is going to cover. So we're going to talk about how to structure a dissertation. We're going to give time management, basically tips, and how do you actually start planning for a longer term research project. We'll talk a little bit about literature reviewing, what goes into literature review, how you might structure it, then go over to literature searching, and if we have a little bit of time left, we'll talk about referencing and reference management. How do you keep basically count of all these sources that you'll be collecting, and have a little bit of time for Q&A afterwards. So thinking about the dissertation process, there's a couple of things to kind of keep in mind. Where, if you're new to this, where do you go to kind of get some of the information? And for the dissertation, your department will be the place to kind of help you with basically how do you go through the proposal, maybe the kind of conventions of the abstract or the content and style of the writing. But where we can help you in the library is basically building upon those skills that underpin that process. So as we kind of pointed out in the overview, these are the skills that are going to be kind of you'll be incorporating that are independent of the things in the department. So just thinking about basically a structure of a dissertation, what are some of the key sections that you're planning to include in your dissertation, if you thought about it? And if you'd like, put some of your answers in the chat. We just want to see what we have at the moment. What are some big key sections in your dissertation that you know that you might need? So this could be like an abstract. Any brave? So. Okay, yes, we've got one coming through. Abstract, introduction, methods, results, discussion. Very good. Any other sections from any other individuals? Conclusion. Okay, yes, Cheryl, thank you. Yes. And this can be really good because it's quite nice to know basically literature review. Yes, very good. Esther. Yes, it's quite nice to know. I'm going to skip over to the next slide. So we look at it. What I'm providing here is a type of master list of some of the things that were mentioned. As you see, we had basically the title, an abstract, introduction, table of contents, perhaps literature review, methodology, results, appendices. If anybody is working with other information that they need to attach at the end. So these are just kind of good things to kind of keep in mind because they kind of help give shape to how our dissertation is going to look like, and think about basically how we're going to distribute some of the resources that we start to gather when you're writing your dissertation. So if we were to look at, for example, some of the model structures that we have here, we have a model from the humanities. And you can note basically there's a bit more fluidity in the structure than the master list that we just saw. So we have an abstract, we have an introduction, and this might be a background or theory. We could have how do you then organize your body paragraphs in a dissertation. It might be through a type of thematic analysis. It might be through chronologically or case studies or various themes, conclusions, bibliographies, and appendices. And you can notice I put the type of percentages on the right-hand side in green of the amount of word count that your words that contribute to your overall word count here. So when you really break it down like that, it's not quite that much. When you kind of get the first, it's a 12,000 word dissertation. You might think, oh my gosh, I've never written anything in 12,000 words, and that can seem quite big. But when you kind of break it down into these little sections, it makes it a little bit more manageable and hopefully less threatening here. We might look at then the model of social sciences. So we have, again, abstract, introduction, literature review. Here we start to get more methodology, results, discussions, and this might kind of also be working in the type of lab report model, presenting work. And again, I've given you some of the breakdowns to some of the percentages in terms of word counts and where your words should be allocated there. So when we think about a dissertation structure and thinking about it, basically, it's helpful to think. One image that I always like to make reference to in academic writing and in dissertation structure and structures and organizations is to think about it in terms of an hourglass here. And I say the hourglass because it kind of starts really wide at the very top. So we look at some of the sections that we mentioned, the introduction, the background, the literature review, the context. This is that type of very wide introducing your reader to the context of your study. And you go funneling down a little bit as you kind of then start thinking about the literature review. And in the body, that's where the meat is happening. This is where the more intense focus of the analysis and the data that you're working with comes in. And this is where you might then be thinking about methodology, results, analysis. And then when you get to the conclusion, you're kind of coming back out again, thinking about discussions, and then you'll start thinking about limitations if you're doing social sciences and some of the implications of your research there. So that's always a nice little helpful image to kind of keep in mind as you're kind of thinking about how you structure a dissertation. And so in thinking about structuring your research, it's also important to keep in mind what's the key point that you are trying to bring across in your own research here. And I always like to say that academic writing is not a mystery novel. And why mystery novels can be really fun to read and they kind of keep you on the edge of see what's going to happen next, what's going to happen next. The big aha and the payoff is at the end where you discover who killed Colonel Sanders in the library. If anybody, maybe that's really old. That's a sign of my age. But your reader needs to know why are they reading this dissertation? What's at stake? And that needs to come to the front. So you need to think about what's the red thread that's kind of going through your research. So what I mean by that, for most projects, this type of connecting thread is the type of contribution that your study is making. So in the introduction, this might be, what is the contribution? Why is it important? In the literature review, how does that contribution fit into the current state of the field? In the methods or the analysis, what's the evidence that you're gonna provide that will explore this contribution? In the discussion section, can you interpret this evidence from that basically that informs the contribution? And the conclusion, based on that contribution. So again, that thread that's kind of going all the way across all these sections and structures is the contribution. And if you keep your reader, if you keep showing that to your reader, the reader won't lose fact of the reason why are they reading and why are they kind of seeing your analysis develop the way it does. So that can be really quite helpful. And so think about that connecting thread that runs across your entire project there. And so with that, we'll go on to time management. And Laura, do you want to try to present from you, or should I close?
No, that's fine. I can navigate from here. That's okay. I think. Give it a go.
I'm not sure if I'm still on present, if it will switch over to you automatically.
That's okay, I think, but the slides moved on okay, hasn't it? Is that right?
Not for me.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay.
I'll stop sharing.
Stop sharing. Sorry,
yeah.
We should have thought about this. Otherwise, there's going to be a lot of chopping and changing, isn't there? Okay. So yeah, in terms of time management, so this is one of the big issues in terms of taking on a dissertation that makes it kind of different to the work that you'll be doing on a day-to-day basis. I know we have got some PhD students joining us today, so obviously this is the kind of the main work that you'll be doing. But for some of you, you'll be doing other work alongside this. You'll still be producing essays for supervisors, you'll still be going to reading groups, going to lectures, you might have exams coming up as well. So one of the challenges is kind of keeping on top of the dissertation kind of as a side project. It's not something that necessarily takes the forefront of your mind all the time. So being able to plan ahead, being really structured in the way that you approach it, keeping really, really good records so that you know what you've done already, you know where you're going with this, and you know what you want to do next each time makes it so much easier to pick up. I think a lot of time is lost through repetition when working on a dissertation. You either find yourself conducting searches you've already done. You might even find yourself reading literature you've already read a few months ago and you'd totally forgotten about it because you weren't keeping great notes at the time about why you were doing something. Sometimes you read something and it's brilliant and it really moves on your thinking. You make some really great notes on it. You then get distracted. You then come back to it and think, what was the main point of this? I know I was really excited by it, but I can't quite remember what the contribution was of this, or what was I thinking? Why did I even approach that in the way that I did? So time management, project management, it's really, really important part of what you do, just so that you can focus on the content. Like the more systems that you have in place at the start of a process, or if some of you are midway through the process, getting those systems in place now will just make the whole thing much less stressful. So there's kind of several aspects when we're talking about time management, project management. One of the things is not just having a to-do list, because as we all know, we can create a to-do list at the start of the day, just write down everything that we think we're going to do. Some things take longer than we thought. Some things we don't quite have the right resources to be able to do straight away. We might not have thought where we need to go to get hold of things or materials. The space that we're working in might be cluttered and it might take us time to get stuff sorted. Having a really good to-do list means breaking down everything on that list into several parts. You know, what is it I have to do? Being really, really specific. How am I going to do it? When will I do it? Think about different scales that you're going to operate on. Are you doing it right now, tomorrow, next week? I know I've got to do that in like 4 months' time, but I've just got to make a note of it now. Like I said, make sure that the area in which you're working is conducive to work. Make sure it's organized. Again, you don't want to waste time going through either physical notes or digital notes, trying to track something down that you know you've already worked on. And why are you doing it? And I think that's one of the biggest things. And we've talked about this and we had workshops last term, so we may not cover everything today that you want to think about. And if it's something like reading styles or note making, then we can share recordings from last term with you. But one of the big things when you are approaching any task is knowing why you're doing it. You know, for example, with reading, you don't want to just kind of open a book, start on page 1, get through to page 355 and not really know what you were trying to extract from that. If you've got really clear questions as to why you're doing something, whether it's writing or reading, or listening to lectures or conducting experiments, doing research, having those really clear questions means you know when you've done it. That means you know when you can finish as well. And if you get the answer to what you want earlier, you don't need to spend the 2 hours that you'd allocated to it. You can just move on straight away. So some of you might have heard me talking about this before, the idea of SMART objectives. And that very first question is, you know, what exactly am I going to do? Be really specific. Make it measurable, so like I said, so you know when you've achieved it. So if it is going to be, you know, rather than just putting reading some books or something on your to-do list, saying, actually, I'm going to go to Wolfson Library, I'm going to read these 3 titles, I'm going to do it in a 2-hour time slot. Is it achievable? Have I checked the books actually available on the shelves? No, they're not. That's going to be a bit of a problem, so I can't do that today like I thought I would. Are they, you know, in a language that I understand, or I'm actually going to have to spend a bit of time doing some background reading before I can launch into some of this kind of more theoretical stuff. So it might seem like it's going to take you a lot longer to do everything on your to-do list, but it's just having that little checklist in mind every time you start something. Why am I doing it? What do I want to get from it? Can I do it? Those sorts of questions. So perhaps we could do that now, actually. Just take literally a minute, think of something that you're going to do next week. You've already got it on your to-do list. And can you make it SMART? So can you be really specific? Can you make it measurable? So like, how do you know when you've done it? Is it achievable? Is it realistic? So, you know, realistic and achievable sound quite similar, but realistic might be, can I write an essay? Is it achievable? Yes, it is. Is it realistic that I could write an essay in an hour? Probably not. So it's that sort of distinction. And how long is it going to take you? So yeah, literally like 30 seconds, just think something you can do next week and just try and make it as detailed as possible on your to-do list. Okay, thanks, Theo. You can skip ahead too. That's fine. Like Alberto said, this isn't a mystery novel. I'm very happy for you to click ahead if you want to. and sometimes it's really easy to make a SMART objective, and sometimes it's surprisingly difficult. And I think that's why it's an important exercise to undertake occasionally, just to remind yourself that sometimes we don't think about things enough before we start them, and we haven't properly thought through what is actually going to be involved in that writing process or that reading process or that research process. And you don't have to do it every time, but it's a useful exercise to undertake. Okay, another question we get asked an awful lot is like, how long do I know this is, how do I know it's going to take 2 hours or 4 hours or 3 days? Or slowly, as you go through your research process, you'll get used to perhaps writing an essay. Definitely, first year students, whether it's masters or whether it's undergraduate, those first few weeks in October, everyone's like, well, I just don't know how long to leave. How long should I leave to write or to read, all those sorts of things. You kind of get the hang of it in the end. Often with a dissertation, you just get one shot at it. But you will be, though, it's an iterative process. You'll be doing similar tasks again and again. So you could keep a little journal. This is one bit of advice. This one comes from Inga Mooburn, who's also known as the Thesis Whisperer. You might have come across her very helpful blog for writing, particularly PhDs, but actually any long project. Just keep a note of how long it takes you to read certain things. And we know that some material is easier to digest than others. And we know that some writing flows much more easily than other pieces. But just keeping that sort of baseline data. How long did it take you? When did you start? When did you stop? How much did you undertake, whatever the task was? And then there's just a little formula there that you can work out, what's your most likely estimate? So your most commonly recorded time is in there, that's ×4. And then you also add in your best time and your worst time, divide it by 6, and then you get a time estimate. It's not perfect as a methodology, but it can help, if you're really struggling from time to time, again, because you might not be doing the dissertation all the time. That can be a helpful way just to think about managing things. Another thing with managing time is it's not just about like today's to-do list. It is planning on lots of different scales. And for a big project like this is really important. So it is really good to have that kind of overall view of the project. When do you start? When do you submit? Where are the kind of key points? Do you have to submit material at any point during that? Are you giving a short presentation, on how you're doing so far? Do you know that you've got research visits if you're conducting research, whether it's to libraries or you're actually doing in-person interviews, or you're in the lab, and you've got a kind of booked slot and you've got, you've reserved some equipment for a particular time. Get all those big dates in the diary, and then that gives you a sense of when you've got time to do the other work that fits around it. We also suggest that you work on other scales as well. So that kind of medium term, which might be weekly or maybe 2 weeks rolled into one, some of the key points, some of the key things that you have to achieve during that week. What are your academic commitments? What are the things you have to do? What are the things that would be nice if you could get started? That's quite a flexible one. And that's probably like the most realistic one, because it allows for things to come up and things to get in the way. And then there's that kind of daily planner. What's my daily goal? What do I really want to achieve today? Roughly, when am I going to do things? Morning, afternoon, evening. And that's not to say you should be working all that time, but it might be that you have other commitments that you need to fit in. Other ways of kind of keeping track, sometimes people don't like the kind of restrictiveness of those sorts of planners, is keeping a research journal. And this is certainly really popular. Whenever we talk about this seems to be something that people kind of really hook into. Because you're not going to be working on your dissertation 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, it's helpful to kind of keep track, whether it's a paper diary, whether it's a private blog, whether it's just a Word document, but just explaining those thought processes. Like, why was I doing what I did today? What did I take from it? What questions does it leave unanswered? And with that, that will give you a sense of where I want to go next. So when you next come to working your dissertation, have a quick look. Oh yeah, I was reading that thing, but it didn't really make sense, or it didn't really connect with the other stuff I'd done. I want to read more about this. Or I was writing and this is where I was going to go with it. I just didn't have time to write those last 2, paragraphs. So that research journal can be really, really helpful hook for you. Another way, if you're quite a visual person, might be to think about a Gantt chart. So for those of you who haven't used Gantt charts before, it's a kind of graphical representation of all the tasks you have to do at particular times. And that can be, you can have a Gantt chart for a week, a month, a year. I've used them for projects before, and it's really, really helpful. There's lots of fancy software you can get hold of, but actually there's a couple of templates you can download from Excel. So the link on that slide there that says create a Gantt chart takes you to a Microsoft help page, and that provides some links to some templates. They can look nice, which sometimes helps soften the blow a little bit. But you can see here, you can assign tasks to yourself, different types of tasks. And then on the right, you can see when those tasks are running. The nice thing about this, of course, is it shows that it's complex. You might be doing several things at once. You might have started writing your literature review while you're also conducting research. You might also be, paying visits to libraries or something at the same time to go and look at material. So it's not linear like some of those other plans feel a bit restrictive in that way. And then, as I said, there is lots of lovely project management software out there. I'm a big fan of Trello. Some of you will have used this. Some of you may not have heard of it before. Again, it looks nice, which helps me if I have to go into sort of planning mode. It's quite nice if it feels kind of calming and relaxing. And I've put together some different templates here just to show you how you could use it. But essentially, you have columns and you can put tasks under the columns. And when you've completed the tasks, you can archive them, or you can move the tasks around as well. So if you want to allocate them to different columns, I'll show you some examples now. So this one is time-based. This is a weekly one. So each week of my dissertation, I've got a column and I've written down tasks that I think I need to achieve during that week. Like I said, the nice thing is if I don't achieve it, I can just drag it into the next week. So it doesn't get forgotten. It doesn't get left behind, which might happen with some of those kind of more restrictive planners. I've color coded the tasks so I can see when I've got to do reading or writing or planning. I can color code them that way. I can add little checklists as well. So there's one at the top of week 2, which says I need to read some books. If I open that up, I've written down all the books I want to read with a little checklist, and then I can tick them off when I've read them. What I can do is share these templates with you after today's session, and then you can perhaps have a play around with them. And you can, if I encourage you to make a copy, otherwise I think we'll all end up collaboratively working on the same Trello board. But that would give you an opportunity just to see if this might be the sort of thing that works for you. Oh, okay, my animations aren't working. There's several other ones here as well. So there's another Trello board I've put together, which is more thematic. So reading tasks, writing tasks, research tasks that way. And also you can create just users for kind of keeping track of what you're reading more generally. Just so every time you read a book, you can drag and drop it into a different kind of thematic section on your board. So yeah, there's some nice. Trello is free. Yes, Aggie, it's free. You can create up to 3 boards for free. So that's what I've done in this case. And yeah, I'll share the links with you when we email around the slides at the end, and you can perhaps see how it could work for you. Loads of other project management tools out there as well. So, I mean, really basic Microsoft to-do lists. That's nice. You can categorize things in different ways. Monday, there's a very small free version, but I think you have to pay for kind of their most fancy tools. Lots and lots of ideas boards. Probably you've encountered these over the last probably 3 or 4 years. Whenever you're on an online call, for me anyway, there always seems to be a Padlet board involved in it where we all kind of stick ideas and stuff that we would have done in person before. But for you as a researcher, they just look great. You can categorize ideas in different ways. If you find resources that you're interested in, you can post the link onto them, and then you can kind of just collect them. So it's a kind of place to put stuff, like a kind of online notice board, I suppose, rather than having it in your room. Use it like post-it notes. Miro is brilliant for that as well, and that's the screenshot that you can see on there. You can create flowcharts. Yeah, it could just be a kind of chaos of post-it notes. Jamboards, you can have lots of different Jamboards for different themes and ideas every time you get an idea. Yeah, Notion, brilliant. Thank you, Cheryl, for mentioning that. That works, yeah, in a similar way. And again, we talked about this research journal, OneNote, Obsidian is really good for your research notes, and just a private blog as well. Oh, great, Theo, I'm glad you use Obsidian. We might be calling on you to kind of share some tips with people as well. So perhaps if we just take 5 or 10 minutes, you might want to, you could go to our LibGuide, and what I'll do, if I stop sharing this, and then if I bring up my screen, then I will just show you our LibGuide. Lots of you, I'm sure, are familiar with this. We talk about it in pretty much every workshop that we do. But if you're not, I will just show it to you. So this LibGuides are produced by all the libraries in Cambridge. Your department will no doubt have one. Lots of departments use them to link to useful resources. The Wolfs and Skills one, this is where we put tips and tools. We mention resources like we've done just then. It's where we can upload recordings, screen shares, those sorts of things. And the time management one, for example, we've got the tips there and tools to help. You can just I can't get rid of that. You can just link to some of the tools that we've got there. So perhaps just go on, have an explore. If you just want to stick to kind of more straightforward templates, then we've got some time management templates there, one specifically for dissertation. The time on task analysis is mentioned. So I'll just give you a few moments just to kind of pause, just think about some of the things that we've talked about over the last sort of 10 or so minutes. And then we'll come back and we'll carry on. And actually, if anyone has got personal experience of using Notion, Obsidian, any of these sorts of research tools, if you feel very passionate about it, very evangelical, and you want to share it with others, then if you want to unmute and just tell the group anything, that'd be really welcome too. Morning, Megan.
Hi, Laura. Hi, Alberto.
Hi. We're just having a little pause while people put into practice some time management tools,
Okay.
but we're recording the session so you can catch up with the first half hour, and we'll carry on in a minute with sort of literature searching and that sort of thing. We've just been looking at kind of planning so far.
Okay, no worries. Thanks.
strange. I dropped out of the meeting for a bit. Suddenly said we're trying to get you back, but I think I'm back in now, which is good. Cheryl, you've said, could you suggest an approximate number of references that you may expect in a 4,000-word literature review? So I think that's probably one for your department, Cheryl. So from memory, it's education, is that right? And I think probably the best thing is if you can get examples of other dissertations, because it varies massively, like what you would be expected to put in from discipline to discipline. So unless we've got anyone else on the call who's got experience in that field, yeah, I would check in with the education library. They might have some previous examples of dissertations that you can have a look at. And as we'll show you in a little while, there are a few other resources out there where you can look at example, quite often PhD theses, it's less frequently for master's dissertations, but it can just give you a sense of something in your field as the kind of the style and how much you need to be supported by other resources, you know, in a literature review. So we'll just check in on, there's a really useful page from Cambridge Libraries that points to different collections that we have access to. But yes, certainly something that's specifically from Cambridge would be the best example there. Okay, so has anyone got any reflections? Has anyone tried any of those before and had a go and not really got on with them, or anyone used them frequently, or anyone had a look at something just now for the first time and thinks, actually, that could work really well for me? You can pop it in the chat, or you just feel free to unmute if it's easy.
I've had to, hi there, it's Aggie here. I've had to sort of battle with various sign-ins, which has been a bit frustrating. So, or download it. So the Obsidian I've downloaded, I'm just sort of having a play with is it Jamboard, yeah, and sort of adding sticky notes. So I really got a lot out of your presentation. I can definitely see the value, but just because of various loopholes, it's quite hard to sort of download it and have a good play, you know what I mean? But yeah, I mean, I can definitely see the value.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And yeah, apologies, but most of them do require you to kind of sign in with Google or create an account or whatever. It's not always straightforward, but yeah, just getting a sense of what some of these are able to do is perhaps useful at this stage. So yeah, just I guess making a quick mental note that you might go back and have a play around. And of course, what we don't want with any of these tools is for them to end up, you know, spending so long getting familiar with them that it detracts from actually the process itself. But there are just lots of different ways that you can access things. Yeah, Theo. Oh no. Oh, sorry, Theo. I see you unmuted, but you're still muted, so I'm not sure what's happened there. Okay, perhaps, was that okay? You didn't have anything to contribute. You just sort of suddenly popped up. That's fine. Okay. Okay, Alberto, you're right.
Making a motion to one moment. Or are you trying to fix
okay.
your microphone? Oh, you're
No.
fine. Okay, great.
Okay, right, that's fine.
Oh, a super quick one, Aggie again, just about Obsidian. It did look epic, to be honest with you. I don't know if at the end, I mean, I've got work from 12. Oh, Theo is the chap who was talking about, I'd love to, YouTube videos are really useful. Okay. I was going to ask Theo if he wanted to share his Obsidian screen just to see what he can do, but that might be asking too much.
But yeah, I think anyone, if someone's actually using it, because, you know, we can talk about some of the principles behind it, but I'm not using it on a daily basis. So yeah, Theo, if you're able to share it, perhaps either chat to Aggie separately. Oh, okay, it's not recognizing your mic. All right. So perhaps later but that would be brilliant. Thank you. And I think that's one of the things that's useful about these workshops is connecting together people who are currently using all these tools, you know, on a daily basis. That would be really helpful.
Yeah, and we do have, I think, initial video on Obsidian on our LibGuide under AI, under the AI tab. So we've connected a couple of, I think, videos along to some of these tools.
Wonderful. Okay, I'll check that out too. Thank you. And
yes,
Theo.
So Theo said he'd happy to switch to old teams. Perhaps if there's time at the end, that would be brilliant, Theo. If anyone wants to stick around, that would be really, really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, that would be amazing.
Okay, so perhaps we'll move on with the presentation for now. We do always realise that we throw a lot at you in these sessions, and in a way it is kind of signposting. It's just to say that all this stuff exists. It's for you to perhaps go and have a go at or come back to us. We can do stuff one-to-one, but we know that different things are relevant for different people. Oh, here's Theo. He's gone and come back again. Okay. Yeah, so a lot of this is signposting, and we know that you're not going to be able to get to grips with anything today. Okay. Alberto. So hi Theo, sorry you're back. Is that okay if we perhaps potentially at the end could share the screens? That would be really nice. If there's people who want to stick around at the end, that would be lovely.
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, perfectly. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Okay, over to you, Alberto.
All right. So. So it's got me from there. So yes, so now we'll move on to literature reviewing, and kind of now this is the part where we want to start thinking about really where you start to focus and narrow the scope of your project. That's what a literature review is. But before we start it, I always find it helpful if we were to think about a literature review, what type of images or metaphors might come to mind when you think about a literature review? And if you could pop some of those thoughts in on the chat, that might be quite nicely. Maybe take about a minute. When I say literature review, what image comes to mind? And I've given you a couple of images that might be helpful in guiding. Masses of reading for Theo. Yes. You picture like maybe a room full of books, and you're surrounded by basically columns of books. Anybody else? A sea without a compass. Ah, that's really quite nice. And why, if I could ask a little bit more, why a sea without a compass?
It's, I guess, sort of, yeah, just as Theo said, it sort of pertains for me just to the sense of feeling overwhelmed by the amount of reading. And so you've got this much to do. But already as I'm saying that, if the reading, you construct your reading just as you would structure your your whole sort of dissertation, or in this case a literature review, because in our we need to have a literature review section. So yeah, but at sea without a compass, it's just like tons. Where's my direction here? What am I going to start first?
Yeah, no, that's excellent. That's excellent. I think and the reason I tried to do these exercises is like, because I think they help us to understand when we think about images and metaphors, basically what the purpose of a thing is when we try to address it. So, for example, I like to think of it as a map, because it's kind of giving my reader a type of information that they need in order to understand what's my regional argument and how they arrive to that type of thing. So even just kind of playing off that example, you're in a sea without a compass, and it feels like that, but you know that there needs to be some type of direction. So literature review will be that compass that basically provides that direction for you, but also for your reader as they kind of go through your argument and see what you're going to do. So that's really excellent. Even in the emotional state of how it makes us feel, we kind of see the elements of what's needed to kind of get out of that feeling, either of lost, you need a compass, and so the literature review will be that compass when you go through it. So what is a literature review? And usually they're described as a piece of writing that discusses published information in a particular subject area. It's a space for you to summarize, synthesize, unpack, and review the sources that you've kind of put together. And while this definition is really widely accepted, it's important to note that there's conventions, format, and expectations that will differ in your literature review, and they will differ based on your discipline, so either humanities, engineering, natural sciences, or social sciences. The conventions will be different based on your department, so educational administration, art history, international relations, and also the type of audience that you're writing for, be they professors, advisors, or peers in your field. So then thinking about the purpose, why literature? Why do we need one? And in their book, these two great scholars, I think it's Christine Feek and John Swales, they talk about literature reviews in this way. So they say, in my literature review, I tell a research story that leads to and justifies my project. I explain what we know so far, what remains to be discovered or fully explained, and how my project might advance in my field. And this quote describes kind of the three key reasons to write a literature review. So for one, literature reviews demonstrate preparation, and they show that you've done your due diligence and you're not just replicating a research project that's already been done. Literature reviews also help you develop and perform a scholarly identity. They demonstrate, and what I mean by that is that they demonstrate that you're a member of your chosen field and are familiar with the major conversations in this field. And lastly, literature reviews help you to contribute to the conversation by explaining how your project is situated within, builds on, or departs from earlier publications in your field. So what do literature reviews do then? In a certain sense, they describe the kind of research that's been conducted. So some of you may have to describe how you got the information and how you got your resources. They summarize, analyze, and organize the various responses found in the scholarly conversation regarding that question. They explain why different scholars provide different answers for the same or related questions, so accounts for the debates or tensions in the literature, and they help us identify what we can add to that conversation here. We find that those type of research gaps that you might have heard about, that term thrown around a bit. So what goes into a literature review? And these are questions that you might think to help you guide you as a bit of self-reminders as you start to kind of construct your literature review. So what are the key works in the field? Identifying what are the big seminal works that you might need to converse with. What other research has taken place in related areas? So not necessarily almost being really super focused, but sometimes it's helpful to kind of look around, especially if you're doing the type of interdisciplinary work, to see how issues are being discussed. Are there any gaps in the existing knowledge? And really questioning why. Why might there be these gaps? Is it just a sense of chronology that basically certain technology wasn't developed at that point, so those questions couldn't be addressed? Or is it basically either political basically situations where certain questions weren't allowed to be asked? So really thinking about the gaps in knowledge and why. What are the main theories that need to be explored? So are seminal theories that kind of guide your field and guide your subject and that have shaped your subject? And also, what's the terminology? Are there certain concepts or basically terms that need to further definition and further exploration? So I've given you a couple of examples here. For example, like what do we mean by culture, or left and right wing? How do we define these type of things? Or even climate, if we're thinking about climate change. So how could we kind of go into those terms and really explore the intricacies and sometimes paradoxes that might exist in that? So what does a literature review do? And an effective literature review then will kind of, as I've been alluding to, kind of demonstrate the breadth and depth of your reading. So that's one thing it does. It also includes your interpretation of any type of previous research. So you're conversing with the research as you kind of then organize it. And it builds a strong foundation of support for your ideas. And I think that's really quite important, because in showing that breadth and depth of your reading and the way you've organized it, it shows to your reader basically that as you're constructing your argument, you really are on firm footing to kind of basically advance the ideas that you're advancing in your own research here. So I've given you a couple of steps to think about as you are thinking about reviewing the literature. So one, you want to find and collect scholarly articles that are relevant to your research topic and will be talking here in a bit about literature searching and how to kind of do that. Two, you want to understand some of the major questions and results within the selected literature. So as you're reading and you're pulling out certain themes and certain questions that seem to be recurring, you also want to formulate several overriding themes relevant to your topic. Compare and contrast contributions of relevant articles within each theme as well. You then, as you start to write, you want to demonstrate your synthesis and critical analysis in your writing. So how are you engaging? How are you thinking through some of these questions and themes that you've kind of seen emerge from the literature? And then lastly, you want to improve the quality and integrity of your writing through revision. So thinking of writing not just as a one-shot type of thing or product that gets made, but it's a result of multiple revisions and multiple cycles of basically submitting, getting feedback, rewriting, and kind of thinking through your writing there. So writing is a bit of a process rather than as a straight line towards a finished product. So how do you structure a literature review? And as I said, why it can be different depending on your discipline. Some of the most common structures that we've seen, we're kind of thinking about some of the key moves, is basically one, the introduction. So introducing the literature, and this usually gives a quick idea of the topic of the literature review, such as the central theme or the organizational pattern that readers can expect to see. This is where you'll tell your reader what subject area you'll be covering. Then you'll use some of the body paragraphs here to kind of summarize, analyze, and sometimes critique the information that you've discovered. And you have a few different options for organizing this information in your body paragraphs. And so you can organize your sources either chronologically, thematically, methodologically, or by publication or trend. And the most important thing is to kind of make sure that you're organizing your sources strategically here. So what is the best way to kind of organize them so that it advances what you're trying to say in your argument here? And then at the end of this literature review, you'll give your conclusion that will serve for recommendations based on the information you've discovered, or to discuss what you've drawn from reviewing the literature so far. So those are some of the key steps to kind of, I guess, kinds of general structure for a literature review here. So that we'll stop there with literature review, and I think now we'll go to literature searching.
Great, thanks. Are there any questions for Alberto there? I'm just going to pop a resource in the chat, actually, which is a book that we have in the library called Houston, We Have a Narrative, and it's all about why science writing needs a story. And I think just to pick up on that point that Alberto made at the start, this idea of telling a story, and that can sometimes help demystify that process a little bit. It gives you kind of purpose as to why you're writing it. You're not trying to capture absolutely everything that was ever published on a topic. You're telling a story really specific to your own research question. And I think that's another large part, isn't it, of literature reviews, is getting over that bit where, these people didn't write their journal article for you. They didn't write their book for you. They wrote it for themselves. You're going to cherry pick specific sections of that book, or just concepts, or even a single citation from that book for your own purposes. So I think holding on to that story, what is the story you're telling, is really a really valuable way of kind of de-stressing the whole process, because it can be so overwhelming or underwhelming. And we'll look at that in a moment. What happens when you do that? You start searching for literature and you find 6 items and you're thinking, there must be more on this. But yeah, any other questions for Alberto just before we move on to actually searching for literature? Nope. Okay, I'm going to share my screen, and I'm actually going to share the screen on the presentation, because I just think that might help if we need to browse anything as well. Okay, and I'll just minimize screen there. Okay. So literature searching, lots of you will be familiar with literature searching already. You will have done it as part of your course routinely. But for some of you, the course that you've been working on so far might have been relatively restrictive. It might be that you have been sticking to reading lists quite closely, or it just might be that the discipline that you are in hasn't required a lot of reading around the subject so far. And it's kind of mainly been about kind of acquisition of knowledge rather than reading more broadly. So just beginning to think about the process of looking for literature if you haven't done it already. First of all, defining your need. And this goes back to what I said at the very start, like, why are you doing it in the first place? So it's not just chucking stuff randomly into databases and search engines and just trying to see what's out there on a huge topic. Again, you've got a very specific research question. So the more that you can drill down to what you're trying to get out of this literature that you're looking for, it means that it's easier to decide what's relevant to your topic. It's easier for you then to read it and extract that information. And it's easier for you to move on and make a decision and say, actually, this isn't relevant to me. Really fascinating, really interesting, but I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. I'm going to stay really focused on my question. Then developing a search strategy. And we're going to unpack this a little bit in a moment, but just that idea of knowing exactly what it is that you're searching for. And then that makes it replicable. So you can go to any one database and be searching using the same search terms. So keeping a record of this, however suits you best. But if you've got that research journal that we talked about at the start, making a note of the terms that you're using, you know, how many results do I get? Are these good terms? Are these bad terms? Are they bringing a lot of noise, a lot of data that I'm not interested in? Again, so you don't repeat yourself. You don't want to waste time doing searches you've already done or that weren't useful to you. That's a kind of proactive way, just going out there and seeing what's out there. But then there's also citation searching. That's reacting to the material that you have found. Keeping on top of your results, as we said, making sure you know what you've read already or what you found already. Depending on the length of your project, some of you will only have a couple of months, maybe even weeks in which to do this. Some of you, if you're PhD students, will have much longer. So making sure that you stay up to date and that you're not left behind. Obviously, new research is coming out all the time, possibly in your field, and you might want to make sure that you don't miss out on that. And then at the very end, we'll just tie it up and make sure that everyone can get access to everything that they need. But do shout out at any point if any of this you've tried and it's not working for you. So yeah, defining your information needs. So this is partly what you are setting out to find. It's also framing your research using the terms that other authors will have used in your discipline. And this is one of the challenges, particularly if you're working in an interdisciplinary field. The same topic might be being talked about, but just in slightly different ways. So it does take a little while to become familiar with the particular language that other authors will be using. Also, when you're going out there and looking for information, like we said earlier, do you want to find absolutely everything ever that's been published on this? Do you want a little bit of the background information, but really you're focusing, I don't know, on the last 25 years? Are you thinking about specific outlets for this information? Are you interested in it cropping up on anywhere, or are you going to just stick to scholarly resources? Or actually is a lot of your work in grey literature and you're interested in policy documents, perhaps, you know, looking at it from a different perspective in that sense? And like I said, how are you going to keep on top of this? It's no point saying, like, today is my day, I'm going to go and search everything, and you're just absolutely bombarded. And really, at the end of it, you're kind of none the wiser. So being kind of measured and having a real process and strategy for going and finding literature is really important. So the first thing anyone would do, you know, if you wanted to find something in a topic, is to identify your search terms. So these might be my search terms in this particular case. These are the things I'm going to chuck into a few databases and see what comes up. And this is quite a common issue, that students will come and see us and say, I'm not finding anything, or I found, you know, 350,000 things, you know, where do I go from here? So this is like your first stage, but it's definitely not the only stage. So try and capture different search terms. Like we said, as you begin to read, think about the terminology that people are using. Again, this is where having that research journal is really, really valuable, not just any old scrap of paper, but as you go through, as you're reading, thinking, actually, I'm going to change my search terms in this particular way, or I need to think about it from this, I don't know, if something's relevant in different geographical contexts, actually, is it talked about differently in different, you know, in different locations, or, you know, things being published in different encyclopedias, thesauruses, think about synonyms, look for related searches. Again, this might bring in a whole kind of field that you hadn't come across initially, and we can look at how you would do that as well. Authors also should identify quite often, I don't know, about 5 keywords when they publish a journal article. Look at what those terms are. And if you're in medicine, and you're used to using kind of mesh headings, these kind of standardized headings that are used, even within something like iDiscover. When you bring up a book record, if you scroll to the bottom, there'll be subject headings there, these kind of standard ways that people relate work that is similar. Quite often you can click on those keywords or those subject headings and it will bring up material that may not be relevant, but it might just start you thinking about things from a slightly different perspective. So when you begin to develop your strategy, you've got your own keywords, think about how you are going to search for them. Increasingly, databases are getting cleverer, but not always. So you might need to be really specific. If something's a phrase, just putting speech marks around it. Something we all know to do, but quite often we're lazy and don't do it. If you want to narrow down your search and be specific, that's one way to do it. I don't want lead here and poisoning in the references. I'm talking about lead poisoning. If I want to bring in 2 search terms, that's going to reduce the number of search results that I get because it has to have the word nuclear and power in it. If I want to exclude words, if I'm getting back a whole load of things that are irrelevant, most databases will let you exclude things just using the term not. And again, we can look at a specific example of that. Sometimes you don't want a specific phrase like lead poisoning. You might want genetically modified, or you might want the words genetically modified within, in this case, 3 words. That N stands for near. And some of the bibliographic databases like Web of Science or Scopus, some of the bigger databases will let you do that. Search for the words within 5 words of each other or 10 words for each other. It keeps it relevant, but not too specific. Other times you might want to expand your searches. So using synonyms, just sticking, butterfly or Lepidoptera, you can then search for both terms, the kind of more technical term and the more common term. Searching for word stems, again, a lot of databases will do that automatically, but not always. So here we would bring back child or children's or child's, childlike. We could bring back lots of words with the word child at the start, and different spellings. Archaeology may or may not have an A there, or colour may or may not have a U, depending on where something's been published. So if you find it's a bit restrictive, just think about chucking in a few different search terms or word stems or wildcards to see if you can increase the number of results that you're bringing back. You can just jot this down, or you can do it quite systematically. And a search grid is one way to do that. So have your different keywords going down in that first column, a row for each search term, and then build in some synonyms. So this might be one, if you're looking at social impact of nuclear power, social, society, community, communal, impacts, outcomes, effects. They're all synonyms of the same thing. We want the word nuclear in there, power or energy. Maybe if I am bringing back irrelevant results about nuclear proliferation, I might want to exclude words like weapons and bombs. So getting that plan sorted can seem like a little bit of extra work, but the more systematic you are is definitely going to help you as you apply it to different databases or across time, or as you want to narrow down your search, or if something's really not working, keep a record of what didn't work so that you don't make the mistake of repeating it again. So which resources do you use? Again, if your course has been quite reading list heavy and you haven't had to go far afield to look for relevant resources, you may not be familiar with the different resources that are available to you through Cambridge. And even if you've been at another institution previously, different universities subscribe to different things. So this is the A to Z database listing if you haven't seen it before. It's linked to from iDiscover, just in the menu across the top. And as you can see, we've got over 1,500 over 1,600 databases now in all sorts of fields and topics. Some of them are secondary, so there's journal articles or books, data sets. Some of them have primary resources in. You can narrow it down by your subject area, the type of database, like you see image databases, reference works, sound, audio, visual. If you know there's somebody specific you want to access it from a particular provider, or you can just search for it if someone's recommended it for you in your department. And Scopus. So it's definitely worth exploring these if you're not familiar with them already. The other thing I wanted to flag up to you are the different types of collections. So this might be particularly if you're doing, I suppose, social sciences research. or arts and humanities. Again, so I talked already about the Wolfson LibGuide. Like I said, there are lots of LibGuides. There's one for your subject. There's one for different types of databases as well, which we've tried to group together thematically. The reason I bring this up is lots of people are unaware of these. It's not something you can kind of stumble across necessarily. So like I said, if you're working on grey literature, there's a really great guide on official publications. You can see all the different, they will just point you to different resources. Someone's done, you know, some of the legwork for you in searching through. Some of them freely available, lots of them are not freely available. And so you do need to access them through this lens, either from the A to Z database listing or from here, because then when you go through to that particular database, it's going to prompt you for your Raven username and password if you are off campus. Patents there, newspapers, news resources. That's a question we get asked an awful lot is, you know, do you have access to certain newspapers? And the other one just to flag up for you here is also theses and dissertations. So if you do want to look up examples of other research that's been done in your field, this can point you to some useful places. Apollo is the repository for all of the theses that are published in Cambridge. So have a quick look and see, you know, if there's been a PhD done. Maybe you're looking at the content, but maybe you just want to kind of see the structure as well and the kind of tone and the format that it's been written in. Ethos is the British Library Service. As you may be aware, the British Library suffered a massive cyber attack back in October last year, and it's really caused some huge problems in terms of accesses to their fantastic resources. I think at the moment Ethos is not available, which is really sad because you can normally just download theses from there. But on the right-hand side, you'll see we do have databases of other resources that are available internationally as well. So just wanted to bring that to your attention. If I can get the PowerPoint back up. Okay, but if anyone's kind of a bit stumped in your particular field, just drop us an email and we're really happy to kind of go through for you and just point out things that might be useful. But again, it goes back to as well, what do you want from it? Do you just want to know what's available out there? Do you actually want to read the full text? Do you need something that's very specific in your field? More often than not, we find too much information. So thinking about how you can kind of limit your searches is really, really important. So like we said, when's it been published? Where has it been published? You know, do you just want peer-reviewed material or are you not that bothered? Do you want to know where it's been published? So just looking, for example, at Web of Science, you'll be familiar with lots of databases. Even iDiscover does this, but down either the right or left-hand side, normally there's a way to limit your searches. So I've just expanded that list ever so slightly. We can see that some people are publishing a lot in this field. That might be quite useful to us. We can limit it maybe just to review articles. You just want to get an overview of what's been published in your field. You don't want the original research article. You can just pick particular years. And at the bottom there, you can see those Web of Science categories, which you can pop out and say, you know, I just work in these fields. I'm kind of interested in interdisciplinary stuff, but I do want to focus in on my area. So that way we don't have to add extra search terms in, but we can still drill down to a more usable subset of those initial results. This is also useful, you know, working out which publications publish a lot in your field as well, and then you can start working on those in a little bit more detail and drilling down your searches. So that's when you go out there and you do all the searching in the first place. Citation searching, lots of you again will be familiar with this, but kind of why go and do all the research yourself? You know, if someone else has written an article on this recently or written a book on this, why not just use their bibliography? You know, if it's been useful for them, chances are some of that material will be useful for you. So look at the bibliography. If something's been published and it's quite seminal in your field, you know, who's cited that work since it's been published? Again, if they found it useful, you might find their work useful. One thing to point out is to think about, when I say consider the size of the index, that's perhaps not very clearly worded, but for example, Google Scholar indexes pretty much anything that it can find that it thinks is academic. And that could just be something that appears on a university website or a report, but it's not necessarily peer reviewed. If you do a search in Scopus or Google Scholar, you'll be searching a much smaller subset of resources. So when you're doing citation searching, you can come up with different results. And here's an example. So I put my sustainable development search into Google Scholar, got back 154,000 results. So I think I would need to do a little bit of limiting there. But if I'm doing citation searching, this one at the top, for example, has been cited by 18 other resources. So those are 18 resources that are indexed in Google Scholar. If you look at the end of that line where it says Web of Science, only 5 peer-reviewed articles that are indexed in Web of Science have cited this particular article. So that gives you a clue as to, the scale on which you're working, but also perhaps the type of quality of material that you'd be getting back if you click on that cited by 18. If I do it, lots of them do look like they're really reliable resources, but there might be some in there that I have to be a little bit more critical about when I'm reading. So, someone's thesis could pop up there, for example. If we click on the 5 cited in Web of Science, this is the 5 that we get. Web of Science is particularly well set up for citation searching. If you haven't used it before, despite the name, it is for all disciplines, although it is more heavily weighted towards sciences and social sciences. But it's worth looking at. But you can see on the right-hand side of that first article, the Freshwater Blue Space Design and Human Health, there are 8 citations. So 8 different articles have cited this since it was published in August 2022. It's also got 97 references itself. So this article has 97 references. So really quickly, you can click on those and find out who this particular article used to build their argument and who has used this article since then. So going forwards and backwards, I think, is really, really helpful. Okay, keeping track of your results. Like we said, we're going to get an awful lot of these. It's an iterative process, search for literature, as Alberto said. You might do a bit of searching, you might do a bit of writing, think, I've got a few gaps, I need to go back again. Different ways that you can do this. You could have some sort of matrix or some sort of grid that keeps track of everything that you've done. What you can also do is download your results from databases like Scopus. You can then get abstracts really quickly. So this is just expanding that previous spreadsheet. And so really, really quickly, you can scan through and see what's useful, what's not useful. On the right-hand side, you can see what the keywords are there for you. So it's not that you necessarily even have to build these matrices of things that you've discovered. Some of the databases will do it for you. But you could have a matrix like this, where you've got particular themes and what do different authors say on my different themes. It's a really rudimentary way of keeping notes, but it keeps you on track in terms of why you're reading something and how relevant is it to your original search question. Okay, before we finish this little bit, I did just want to quickly talk about using AI. We're getting more and more questions about, should I use it? Is it ethical to use it? If I want to use it, how can I do so responsibly? We know that lots and lots of people are using AI for generating ideas for these kind of initial stages in the writing process, but also for trying to find literature as well. We're not endorsing it and we're not criticizing it. We recognize, that people are engaging with it. So I suppose what we wanted to do was just give you some perhaps top tips if you are thinking of engaging with AI. I mean, we engage with AI all the time. The spell checker on Word, for example, is obviously reading what you're doing and, suggesting that something's been written wrongly. Constantly when we've got predictive text, when you're writing on WhatsApp, something's clearly reading your messages. Or on, Gmail, it knows what you want, how to reply to a particular email. So it's being used all the time. When you're searching or you're querying an AI database like ChatGPT, just thinking about how you do it so that you don't waste time. Obviously, it can just generate a huge amount of things. So there's a really nice framework that's been developed recently, the CLEAR framework. So being really concise, so just keeping it really, really specific. If you want it to generate something that, you just want the top 10 points on something, or give me 5 ideas about this. So keep it logical as well. Give me an introduction on this, then make this point, then can you do this at the end? Tell it what you want. Otherwise, you can spend hours kind of with it generating content. Be flexible, though. If it comes back, it's not quite right. Re-query that database. Oh, actually, could you give me a bit more on this? Could you focus in this way? And be reflective about it. In every single case, obviously, we can't just take AI as given. You need to read something carefully. You need to apply it to your own context. You need to think, does this really fit what I need? Don't trust it at all in any way, shape or form, but it can be useful as part of the research process. One of the things that people come to quite often to us about is, I found this book or I found this article, but on AI, but I can't track it down. Lots of you will be aware by now that AI can generate false citations. It finds an author that has published in the field and some of its other books and glues together all the different relevant words to make a false citation. It seemed to be particularly bad for Guardian newspaper articles. I'm not sure why. But be aware of that. So just query another database that you trust, whether it's iDiscover, even Amazon, just looking at the books that are for sale on Amazon. Is this a real book that it's pushing towards me? Again, you might ask it to quickly summarize a book for you. That could be useful just to give you an indication as to whether or not something's going to be useful. But remember, it's not going to be reading it. Well, hasn't read it at all. It's not going to be providing an answer that is relevant to your specific question. So maybe use that as a starting point to help you differentiate between some different resources that you're interested in, but you still have to do the hard work, sadly. But I put into ChatGPT my sustainable development question and said, could it give me 10 books that were relevant in this field? And these were all real books. It gives me a quick summary, as you can see there. It's a starting point, but we wouldn't necessarily say that you use it as your only way of searching. I'm not going to spend ages on reading and note making. As I said, we did sessions on that last term, but I did just want to flag up, ways of kind of capturing your reading. OneNote, I really like OneNote, lots of different tabs. I can cut and paste things in there. I can get images in there. I find it quite flexible. I can put my own notes in. The text editor is very advanced, so I can have checklists in there. I can flag things as important. I can signify that they're a particular question that I've got. They're my thoughts, not the words of the author that I'm reading. And also Zotero as well. And we've got a little bit of time to talk about how you might use Zotero, but I do think that's also very useful for capturing your notes alongside your readings. And Alberto will talk a little bit about how you capture some of those notes directly from the text, or if you've got a PDF. So I'm not going to spend ages on this. We'll share the slides with you, but do just think again about what it is you want to get from it. And then just quickly thinking about keeping up to date. Lots and lots of databases let you set up alerts. So if you are working on a longer research project, you conduct a search today, by tomorrow it could be out of date. So if you think this is something you want to come back to, Scopus, Web of Science, Google Scholar, conduct a keyword search, and then you can set an alert so that every time something that mentions those particular words is published in that database, you'll get an email. And here's an example of an email that I just got on Thursday. It's a very basic search, climate change and kelp forests, but that's something that I wouldn't necessarily have known had just been published, so I could pick up on that straight away. Also, you can set up an alert every time something is cited. So if there is a really seminal book, I don't know, let's say Orientalism by Edward Said, every time somebody cites it, you could get a result sent through to you by email, and you could just quickly dip in and see if it's relevant to you. Finally, I just want to highlight Browsing, which is a resource that not a lot of people know about. It's a visual way of looking at journal tables of contents. So you can go into your particular field, pick journals that are particularly that publish a lot of material that you're interested in. So do you remember when we did that search in, I think it was in Web of Science, we could see that some journals had an awful lot of material published, on sustainable development and the kind of health impacts. I might want to zoom in on those particular journals, and then every time there's a new table of contents published, I can just quickly dip in this way. I don't have to remember. I can just check in on Browsing and see when there's new articles that I need to read. I can either just do that by searching for the journal, or I can create this bookshelf, which is the second image on the right. So I can collect together the journals that I really enjoy reading, and then I can dip into those on a regular basis. Finally, you should be able to access absolutely everything that we subscribe to in Cambridge off-site, if it's an electronic resource. If you do find yourself searching Google Scholar a lot, sometimes it's kind of difficult to make it clear what we subscribe to and what we don't subscribe to. You can set up library links, so it just pushes the stuff to you that you've got that University of Cambridge subscribes to. Lean Library is a nice little bookmarklet that will pop up and say, oh, did you know that University of Cambridge has got a subscription to this article? So perhaps if you find yourself going to publisher websites quite a lot. Yeah, let me know if there's anything you can't find. JISC Library Hub Discover searches all the research libraries in the UK, and so you can find out what's published elsewhere if we don't have a copy here in Cambridge. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. I realise I talked for a very long time there, but it always surprises me. We've got so many resources. We can't expect everybody to know about these unless you're suddenly starting on a big project like this. And we don't want you to miss out on the fact we subscribe to so many different things that we think would be really, really useful to you. So please do shout and say, you know, have we got this? Or my friend's got this at another institution, or I just feel like you should have access to something in particular. Yeah, and we can kind of help you navigate through that because there's a lot out there. Okay, sorry, that was a lot. Any questions?
That was really quite nice. I love the browsine. Browsine is
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like going into like a magazine store and watching it. So
yeah, I know. And table of contents browsing was so boring for so many years. I don't know if anyone, probably people don't remember, but things like TikToks and it was all fed to you through RSS feeds, and it was kind of, it was quite clever for the time, but it was just so dull. Whereas now to be able to see the covers, I don't know, maybe I'm just a visual person, but I find it a lot easier.
Same here. Yeah. All right, so we've got about 7 minutes. So I'm going to give no questions. Okay, one. Thank you, Theo. So I'm going to give a bit of a whistle-stop tour of Zotero, just because I think for me, this thinking about reference managers and reference management software wasn't something natural. I still love to print out my articles and read, and while that is really nice for me, one of the things I always kind of found myself doing up until a couple of years ago was I would get to the end of a project. I had have my notes in where I needed to cite, and then I would have a huge stack of books or articles basically all around my desk, and I would end up basically spending more time almost on the bibliography than actually almost on the work itself. And so when I came into Zotero, I thought, oh my gosh, it's changed the way I think about referencing, keeping all my sources together, and especially in a huge basically research project, you want to start thinking about these questions a lot earlier than leaving it more towards the end, because it will make your experience when you have to submit drafts, when you're doing literature searching and you're bringing in new things, really easier. So you get to the end, the last thing you want to think about is, have I cited correctly, or where is that source that was really, really important, but I don't know where I found it anymore. So I'm going to share my screen really quickly and show you Zotero. Let's see. So we usually recommend Zotero just because, or Mendeley, is because these are our free softwares, and you have access to EndNote as a University of Cambridge student, and EndNote is really good, but the only problem is that when you leave the university, then you have to think about how are you going to transfer all this information. So if you're in a master's and you're thinking about going for further study, or you're a PhD and you've gone a postdoc, or you're thinking about continuing to work on your research, this might be something you don't want to think about as you're leaving. So Zotero, Mendeley are open source, especially Zotero. I love Zotero. I'm a bit evangelical about it. So when you download Zotero, and we have run a couple of workshops last term on it, so we'll have the recording so we can go a little bit more slowly. It will look like this. You will have a left-hand panel, and this is where you start dividing your research. You can make different folders. So if you've got certain sections in your dissertation, you can break it down by sections. You can break it down by practice if you want to have a bit of a practice on it, or any type of projects that you're working on. And so then you have this middle panel, and this is your entire library. Everything that is in this left-hand panel and that has been divided is in here as well. So you can kind of think about it as basically your main library with everything. And I've organized it alphabetically So if I wanted to scroll down, I could see all the authors here. One of the nice things about Zotero is that when you download a resource, you have also the icons, and it kind of gives you a little bit of a hint of what that resource is. So you can see that this is a chapter, this is an article, these are books, these are a bit of a web page. So that's a nice way to kind of organize it here. It also tells you basically whether you have a PDF attached to that resource here, and you can see it on the far left-hand side. And so if we wanted to then go into basically a resource that we have worked on, let's just say, let's see, this one here, no, this one here. You can see that if I drop down to there, we've got the article. I have a couple of articles already opened, and this is quite nice because then this is a relatively new feature of Zotero in the sense that you now have a PDF reader in here. And it's really helpful to kind of keep your readings together along with your citations. So it kind of allows you to put multiple aspects of the research process in one location here. You can take notes, so annotate. So you've got a bit of an annotation there. You can see all the different types of annotations that I've done here. If I wanted to take notes, so this one I don't have notes, but yes, you can take an item note here. And there are a couple of different ways to do it. So if I wanted to, basically, let's just say I'm going to highlight here. That will come up as an annotation. And then I would say I want to add a note here. This is the citation. Add to note. And what it does is it takes that piece of text that I have wanted to cite. It already gives it in the citation format that I've decided. So I work with APA. And that's something you can decide when you start setting that up. And then if I'm writing, this is another very cool thing about reference managers. So as you're writing and citing, you can then say, when you download it, you'll get the link. And then you can say, it will show you the style. I want APA. That's okay. So that would be one way to add a resource there. If I wanted to work on a bibliography, then I could basically add edit bibliography, and it would already cite that there. Again, added another citation. And what's nice with that is basically if I'm quoting from a book, I can click on that. I can add the page number if I wanted to. I can press enter. And one thing you'll notice is because I've started to enter my sources from Zotero using this type of write and cite method, it will go updating automatically from there. If you didn't want to basically take advantage of Zotero like that and just use it as a way to kind of organize your reading, as I said, this is another way to kind of do that. And you can see, let's say I wanted just to kind of say this, I'm just using this to kind of have a collection of sources that I'm reading. You can color code also by adding tags. So tags are wonderful things because you can organize it by words or themes here without making it a big commitment to actually changing the resource itself. You can add the theme like that. So you can see here on my left-hand side, need to read or read. So I'll say need to read, and it already tags it like that. If I'm saying what I'm going to actually I've added that, reading right now, you can assign a color to it. Let's say set that color there. And now I can also organize it visually to know where I'm at of what I'm working. You could also move it across. So the wonderful things about reference management is that it really allows you to kind of work with multiple aspects of it. You don't need to use it for citations if you want to. You can use it basically just to kind of help organize your readings. You can help it to organize your notes. So you can use as little or as much of the sources as you want with something like Zotero or Mendeley as well. And I think that's the key message. But it's just thinking about a plan at this early stage of how you're going to kind of keep track of all these type of things. And I know that this is really, really quick. So if you have any questions, happy to stay afterwards, or if you'd like to book a one-to-one session to kind of start thinking about it, maybe you've downloaded, you want to play around. We also have some wonderful step-by-step videos on our LibGuide under reference management. So you could have a play around, and then we could also have a meeting about that. So I found some journals don't allow to add the PDF to Zotero. Yes, I wonder if is it something that we perhaps have access to in terms of reading content. Another thing you can do is if you download the PDF itself, you can drop it into Zotero and it will automatically attach the metadata to that, or you can create the source. And that's a type of thing where you can create the source manually and then attach the PDF afterwards if it doesn't automatically download directly from the web clipper. It creates two items for the same article. Yes, so then you probably might want to then go back and delete one of the items that doesn't have the thing. But I would probably have to take a look at it first to see how it's kind of working through, and maybe we can troubleshoot some of those type of things.
Yeah, and I think actually that's one of the nice things about Zotero. It does automatically spot duplicates, so it can be frustrating. But there's a little section called duplicates, and then you can just go through and deduplicate, and it will say, you know, which one of these do you want to keep. Yeah, so that it does it kind of help you manage it in that way. And again, that's really easy to do, of course. If you did a search in Google Scholar and you downloaded loads of things, and then you did it in Scopus, and then you did it in Web of Science, it would be really easy to end up with 3 or 4 of the same article just because you were trying to get everything in there. So it helps you stay on top of that. You don't just have to spot it yourself. Oh, thanks, Theo. Are you happy for me to send your CRSID to Aggie? I can just drop her an email. We've got her email address.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, go for it.
Thank you. That's really kind. Cheers. So yeah, as we said, we realise this is throwing a lot of information at you, but it is to signpost. It's to show you that there's all sorts of different resources out there to help you with the process, to maybe get you thinking about the process kind of critically rather than just letting it happen to you. But yes, as Albert said, the underlying message is come and talk to us, drop us a message, have a go. This is the beginning of the process, and we're definitely here to support you throughout the whole thing. We'll do a follow-up session in a couple of months' time to sort of think about the end of the dissertation process, about how you deal with a long document, how you edit that long document. But we appreciate that timescale doesn't fit for everybody. You know, some of you are submitting dissertations sooner or later than others. So again, we're really happy to run any of these in a one-to-one fashion or for a small group of you. That's no problem at all. But we recognise probably lots of you got to go, so do feel free to drop out. But if you want to stay on, we're really happy to.
Just before we start losing people, though, I wanted to draw attention to some upcoming workshops that might be happening. So I think there's one on, what is it? Sorry, let me just scroll down really quickly. There was research methodologies that's coming up, and research data management for your dissertation or theses. And if you would like a bit of time to write, we are holding a writing retreat in April. And you can link to all these type of things basically from the WolfWorks page there as well. And last but not least, of course, we also are curious in getting feedback as well for our workshops, see what we're doing, if it makes sense, or basically what else we should include or maybe take out. So we would really appreciate and be grateful if I put a link to a feedback form here when you have some time. Basically, if you could give us a little bit of feedback as well, so to know how we're doing and what we need to include, if we need to include anything else. And yes, as Laura said, I'm fairly happy to stay afterwards. We know that we've hit already the mark, so if you need to leave, Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you, Theo.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Yeah, we'll do that, Jessica. We'll just pop the feedback form in the email when we send the recording through. Thanks.
Are you guys interested to see the Obsidian thing? Or yeah?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Okay.
Should we stop recording?
Oh yeah.
Good
okay.
idea. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.